so many of my clients as well, they've DIY'd it through their branding, through their website. Then they're coming to me and they're like, gosh, this is just so much easier. I get so much more traction. I'm doing the same thing as I did with my podcast. I'm going to DIY it till I get so far. But the podcaster and I have a question about the credibility of that.
Most hosts never achieve the results they hoped for. They're falling short on listenership and monetization, meaning their message isn't being heard and their show ends up costing them money. This podcast was created to help you grow your listenership and make money while you're at it. Get ready to take notes. Here's your host, Adam Adams.
Hey, what's up, podcaster? It's your host, Adam A. Adams. And today I've got a guest on the show, Monica Fawn, who actually lives close to me, which is random. And so we're recording in the same studio. Wait, hold on. Let me push a button. Yay! It doesn't happen so much that I have someone in the studio. Usually everything's recorded virtually. So it's going to be a little bit different, but I'm stoked because Monica has had her podcast, but she hasn't had it for a ton of time, right? So what was it, like 16 episodes in?
And that's actually not my first podcast.
Oh boy,
I know, there's so much to unravel. Don't even start.
This is going to be fun. Okay, so you had another podcast?
I had 2 other podcasts.
Okay, guys, 2 other podcasts. I'm just curious, in your other 2 podcasts, tell me about the first one, how long it went, how many episodes you got to.
First one was probably 32.
32 episodes. Mm-hmm. And how long did it take you to get 32?
I was putting them out weekly.
Okay.
Yeah. And I was being pretty consistent at that point.
Weekly, so 7 months, 8 months, something like that?
Less than that, actually.
Okay.
Yeah, I think I did a whole bunch at once. And
okay.
Yeah.
Cool. Why did you do a whole bunch at once? What was kind of the reason?
I wanted somebody to have something more to listen to because I was talking about the topic of flow state. It was called Flow State Freak. Okay. I was obsessed with flow state. I thought it would help people who were in business, and I was just really passionate about it. So I started talking about it. I didn't really see that it would help my business directly. And I thought, well, maybe someday I'll do workshops on this. I didn't have any idea where I would want it to go.
Okay.
But yeah, I wanted them to have something to listen to and not just be like, oh, there's 2 episodes, I'm bored, and then they're gone.
I love that. But did this build into a business that you had?
It did not.
Okay. So you were like, I want to add value to the world.
I just was winging it. I was interested in it.
I love this topic. Yeah. I definitely want other people to experience it. I'm going to give out. And did you close it after you were done?
Yeah, I deleted it.
How did it feel when you deleted it?
It was painful, but I think one of those mottos I had when I was younger was like, if you don't succeed, like destroy all evidence you tried. So it's kind of like, well, that was a fun learning experience. And with speaking, when you're first learning to speak and talk in a mic and recorded videos, even on Zoom, I was so nervous about Zoom. It took me a couple years until I had to talk to clients on Zoom, even though I worked remotely. So you learn and there's a learning curve, and it kind of felt okay to delete that learning curve.
So what made you feel like you failed? You're like, if you don't succeed, delete all evidence. What makes you feel like you weren't succeeding with it?
That it honestly had no goal and it wasn't connected to anything.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think that's fair.
Yeah.
Second podcast. The first one was in the 30s. Second one.
The second one, I got to about 45, 48, somewhere in there. I was almost getting to 50.
Better.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
This one was strategic around my business. It was called Onthentic, which is the name of my company. Onthentic branding. And it was created because at the time I had the idea of creating an additional service. And so I was creating content around what I think that person who was a first-time entrepreneur just getting started with having their own business wanted.
Okay. One of my favorite things that you just said was that person. I want to like bring it to the listener for a second.
Hi, podcaster.
Yeah. I want to bring it to the listener, that person. So just pay attention to that if you're listening, because you can tell that she's focused on someone, an avatar, her perfect client. And when you're podcasting, I want you to be focusing on the same thing. We talk about it a lot on this, on the show as well. Just remember that there's a lot of podcasters that try to say, all of you guys, all of you people, all of my listeners, and it's not personal. I'm speaking to you. You probably are aware that there's someone else listening also, but I'm talking to you. And I could tell that when she said that person, that she's focused on someone. And I want you to be also focused on that whenever you do any episodes, any content. Think about who you're trying to add value to. Just like I'm like making this little tangent and side conversation with you, I'm thinking about you. I want you to get the value that I think you need to get. And I try to understand everything that you're going through, everything that's holding you back, everything that you're stressed about, what you want to achieve, and all of that. And I can tell she's doing the exact same thing. So that's a great takeaway. So 48, almost 50 episodes on Onthentic.
Yes.
And that's the name of your company right now too?
Yes. Onthentic branding. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Onthentic branding. And you did 48 episodes. Why'd you stop?
My audience, or essentially the person I wanted to work with, the client I wanted to attract, changed. That no longer served who I wanted to work with anymore. And so it was a great learning experience, but it also got deleted.
Wow. Before we talk about your new podcast, Brand Anatomy, which the link is in the show notes. And once she gets to around 60 episodes, she's going to delete the whole thing and you'll never find it again. So jump in right now before it's gone. I hope that doesn't actually happen.
So Adam, actually, I wanted to talk to you about that.
Oh boy. Okay. I had something else that I wanted to say.
Yeah, let's go there first.
I want to go to your first two podcasts because somebody listening might have wanted to start a podcast, but they haven't. And one of their biggest fears is, I don't want to waste time. I don't want to waste energy. I definitely don't want to waste money. Money is a resource. Time is a resource that we don't want to just waste. I guess in a way, I don't want to go through the same thing that Monica went through. Like, so how do I solve that? But I just want to think, what did you learn on the first one? What did you learn on the second one that you're kind of doing differently? And then we'll go into talking about your 60th episode where you completely quit this podcast. I don't know if that's true, but let's talk a little bit about what did you do differently in terms of maybe sound equipment. Did that change at all during the first 3 podcasts that you did?
Nope. Actually, I had taken a course.
Okay.
So I'm the researcher, learner kind of person. Like I want to know a lot of stuff before I get into it, which saves a lot of time. I do recommend to people to learn, but not get so paralyzed with the learning that they never take action. Yeah. There's a balance. So I had the ATR 2100. I just plug it into my computer. Because of what I do with my work, I already had the Adobe suite. So I just learned how to use Premiere Pro and edit my own show.
Okay.
And that stayed the same.
Hey, guess what? You're using an ATR right now.
I am. It feels so familiar.
I love it. I love it. Okay. So the equipment didn't change.
No.
How about, let's think about you speaking to the right person. How did that evolve over 3 podcasts?
So that ties into one of the other questions that you had asked, and that is what I had learned from each of them. The first one was tied to a passion project of mine, but it wasn't tied to business. And if I'm spending that much time on something, it was great. It was fun. But I was like, this can really help my business, and I really need to be spending my time there. So it was okay to let that go, make a change. I learned a lot. And here's the other thing that I tell my clients too is, when you have experience with something, it helps you navigate, make decisions, and accelerate that much faster. Even if it's in a completely different type of industry, different experience, like you can just go and move faster. So I knew it wasn't a waste, maybe a little bit of painful, but I wouldn't tell someone to like, oh, have everything perfect before you start, because what you get out of doing the work is something that you can't get without doing the work.
Yeah. Okay. How about the second podcast? What did you learn from 1 to 2? And now to 3?
Definitely needed to narrow my audience.
Okay.
For sure.
So let's talk about that, because I agree with you. I think a niche audience, a singular person that you're really focused on, that you can definitely help everything about. I think that's important. We talk about that a lot on this show. But like, I think for the listener, they can hear that as a concept, but maybe they're not sure how to do it. So how did you learn how to do it over 3 podcasts?
So this is the one thing my clients struggle with the most. When we work in branding and marketing, when we're building websites, who that you're building this for, who are you talking to, is something they conceptually know. I've heard you talk about this a lot. Like, oh, this person who makes this much money. Then, oh, maybe we'll get into like demographics. Oh, this age and this location. But I always recommend to my clients and help them with distinguishing the psychographics that go along with that person. So I needed also to just play niche down. The second podcast was for anyone who's starting a business, any new entrepreneur. I mean, they could be doing makeup, they could be doing coaching, I mean, anything. So I was all over the place with my content. And so, like you've said, Adam, it doesn't really speak to anyone. There's a cool couple episodes that people are like, I loved that. But the mass majority of anything else, they're not coming back for more consistently. Although that podcast needed to generate leads for a business, it was not.
Okay.
And also, I decided I don't want to actually start this service of this business. And I'm actually really glad I started the podcast first because it helped me understand that. And if I were having to undo something, like I did something and deleted it, I would much rather that be podcast than, oh, I built this huge service. I built this huge website and I was trying to market it.
Yeah. I'm thinking through something that you said, and I'm not able to take as many notes as I normally would when I'm sitting in front of my computer. So it's hard to like go right back, but I'm going to try. So if you're listening, that's one takeaway. Do whatever you can to take notes, to write things down. It is actually easier when you're a podcaster, and I kind of feel like slightly out of my element. I love it. It's fun. I like to do this. But you said something like that one listener, how much money they make, that you were kind of all over the board, that there was a couple of episodes that they probably liked, but maybe other episodes that weren't exactly for them. And I think that's a huge takeaway for the listener right now. If you're trying to do what's called niche, you got to have that one person in mind, and everything needs to be focused on them. That's one of the takeaways. The other takeaway is the psychographics. So she's talking about how demographics, geographics are important, that you do it, but you also got to think about the psyche. What is that person worried about? What's holding them back? What are they going through? What do they need? What do they want to achieve? And if they achieve it, what does it mean for them? And if you can learn that about your perfect avatar, if you can focus on that every part of your content, then you're going to be hitting somebody's heart. And people don't make decisions because of their brain. I like to think, oh, I'm an intellectual person. I like to say, well, I'm not emotional. That's not me. I like to say, I'm above that, or I take data. Engineers listen to this and they're thinking, oh no, come on. I'm not emotional at all. I can't even cry, blah, 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 blah. However, most humans, including you, the engineer who might be listening, most of us tend to have emotional want or desire to do something. And if we think we're intellectual, if we think that we use data, all we really do is use that data to justify our feelings. That's what most of us are doing. So if we want somebody to take action, we really have to get to the psychographics. We really have to get down to the why behind the why behind the why. Like if they accomplish something, what does it mean for them? And what does that mean for their future? How fulfilled they feel, their sex life, their confidence, their believing is like their parents and their spouse, for example, that they feel like they're enough. Like these are the deep parts of what is real, is the connection. What's the why behind the why? And that is what we understand if we spend time with psychographics, like understanding. And going back to what we were mentioning before is making sure that all of the content hits that person. So for example, you mentioned how you had a couple of episodes that were amazing and people noted it. They told you about it. They were excited about it. And then there were some others that didn't really hit the spot for that human being, that avatar, that perfect listener, their psychographics, demographics, geographics. And so the podcast wasn't really strong. And people think I'm going to be broad. Like the listener probably, and you, when you very first started, is thinking, I want to help everybody. I can help anyone. And then what happens is we put out content, and a few pieces of that content are great, and a few of them are okay, but for other people. And what the listener does is says, ooh, that was a great episode. And then they come to the next one and they're like, this isn't really specific for me. I don't really need to know this. This isn't hitting my psychographics. And so they're going to say, I want to find something that does. And so they leave your podcast. Even though you've got a couple of great episodes for them, when you have others that don't, they leave. And you've probably heard this if you listen to the show, there's a lot of people that are syndicators. Just means I raise private capital. And they think, I want to help people that are raising capital and closing on deals and finding deals. And I want to go, and I think I can also help the passive investor who just wants to be a limited partner and do nothing but leverage other people's time. And so neither person is going to stay on the podcast. And that's such a huge mistake. I want to help this person and I want to help this person. But half the time, this person is saying, it's not really for me. And the other half the time, the other one's saying, it's not really for me. So what ends up happening, neither person listens.
Yes.
You got to be real focused.
That's my clientele, real estate investors. And one of the parts of the thing that we're always doing when we're going through their brand strategy, and that's the thing that changed everything for me, Adam, is learning brand strategy. Before, I had been a graphic designer who learned to do website design, who learned to do copywriting. Like everyone else, I'm learning how to do branding backwards because that's the way we experience it, but that's not the way that it's built. So with all of my clients, they're getting on podcasts. Yeah, I've been on 30, I've been on 100 podcasts. And then I ask them, how many of them were not other real estate syndicators? None. Okay. So I'm like, are you getting in front of your investor? And they're like, no. It's like, okay, so that's where we need to focus on. And it's the same thing for creating the content. A lot of my clients are podcasters as well. They're learning through it, but they're sharing what they're learning. And that's not necessarily what their investor wants to hear. And so again, they're not getting traction. So one of the biggest things that helped me shift and say, okay, I know what I'm doing with my podcast now. So I learned brand strategy at a deep level and applied it. And that told me exactly what it is that I needed to do instead. And I formulated my own philosophy around branding with all of that I've learned, all the books, all the courses, all the personal experience, is that branding is R.E.D, R-E.D, not the color. Branding can be any color that you want it to be, but R.E.D stands for reputation, experience, and distinction. So right away, when I was recreating my podcast, I knew who it was that I was going after. It was like, what reputation do I want to build for myself? What do I need to be known as? Who is my client looking for? Like, what type of personality are they looking for? Who fulfills this role for them? And then their experience. How can I make this a really great experience for them? Entertaining, relaxing, giving them what they want, cutting out the fluff, all that kind of stuff. And then distinction. What makes me different from anyone else in the industry? Why would they listen to me? When we go through those pieces, then we know, okay, I know what I need to create, and therefore delete the old podcast.
Okay. I want to get to that place where you said a few minutes back, Adam, I actually want to talk to you about that. So with Brand Anatomy, your current podcast, is something happening with it? Are you excited about it? Are you changing things?
So I love Brand Anatomy. There's only 16 episodes. I was very dedicated, very consistent. I had guests coming on. I was doing all the editing. I had like this big spreadsheet of, the 30 other next episodes I wanted to record. And then we were moving, buying houses in Airbnb, renovating it, getting married. Like, I put the podcast on hold, and I was going through in my head all the things. I think some of the things you and Julie Holly talked about is maybe I'll turn it into seasonal. And yeah, I wasn't consistent with it, but my podcast, I knew that organic new listener base was actually not my goal. I'm getting so many leads for people who want to work with me through events, through client referrals, that I honestly can't take them all. I'm like telling people I can't work with them. So that is not my problem. My problem is I want the right person. I want the person who's qualified. I was expanding my service and the price offering. So I wanted the podcast to pre-educate them. And it's done that. I wanted them to get to know me. You hear my voice. You hear me talking about these things instead of spending a 2-hour discovery call describing what a brand is and why you should build a brand, not a business. Like, here, listen to this podcast episode. Listen to this. It has been so beneficial for my business, building that reputation. They feel like they get to know me. My discovery calls are pretty much like 3 questions and give me my proposal. Like, it's so easy now. So it has absolutely served my business. And I was like, okay, that's all I need. I will make episodes just for my new client lead. And now I want to change my business service offerings.
Okay.
And so I need and want a consistent longevity podcast to do that. And I know I cannot do it myself. So one of my questions to you, I've already listened to so many episodes, the whole Julie Holly series, so many of your solos. I know what your answer is going to be, but I'm going to ask you, should I relaunch? I only have 16 episodes. Should I relaunch or should I just start like adding on to what I did? I haven't posted anything new since spring. It's been months.
Oh, okay. So May 9th is episode 15 and that's the last one.
Yes. It's been a really long time. Like traction, dead. I do have one person on my email list though. He randomly asked me, he's a financial advisor. Hey, do you have a new podcast episode out? Like people want it and they notice that there's nothing else coming out. You only
have one person on your email list and that one person reached out?
I have more. I have more, but this one guy multiple times.
100% of your people are wanting this. It means
but one guy literally will go out of his way to email me. You know how many times you say, oh, email me this, like to your email list. And a lot of people don't respond. I'll just send out something. He's like, hey, do you have a new podcast episode yet? I'm like, do you need help? Like you can work with me, but he wants the podcast. And I'm like, gosh, I'm letting him down. And I'm sure I'm letting way more people down if he's actually taking time out of his busy day as a financial advisor to reach out and ask about it. But do I relaunch? Or do I just start adding on and start out like...
So let me clarify a couple of things because it sounds like you're saying having a giant listener base was never important because you get plenty of clientele by referrals and etc. And this was meant only someone comes in and it kind of helps them get a foundation so that the discovery call is easier. Later, I want to ask you about your discovery calls, like any tips that you have to grow a discovery call, because the listener most likely has a business that a discovery call could help them to be able to sell more, get more people on. And it sounds like you're doing well. You got your 3 questions and it's ready. So I definitely want to talk about that. But I need you to re-clarify for me the change in motivation, I heard you say it, but I didn't process it. And so tell me, like, why are you thinking that you might want to rebrand or relaunch your podcast?
So I know that I need to relaunch my podcast or I need to start podcasting again.
That's the big part, is that you need to start again? Or is the big part like how you do it? So
my question is, do I just add on to what I've already started or not delete, but we can remove and release those episodes again? But why I know I need this change is because I've worked one-on-one with my client base. That means I can only take 5, 6, 8 clients a year. And I have way more than that wanting to work with me. And because of that and my brand strategy, my service offerings, I mean, we're talking multiple, like 5-digit projects. I mean, massive amounts of investments and time. I can only take on a few. A lot of people I'm running into at these events, they are a little bit new in the process. They don't have that money to invest, but what I do is still so valuable to them. So not only on top of doing one-on-one client projects where I basically do it for you, we build the brand together. It comes from you, but I do all that hard work, heavy lifting, everything. And it's a smooth ride for you. But I'm also learning these people aren't learning as much through the process since they're doing it for them. But I want to do group programs where instead of talking one-to-one to someone, I can talk from 1 to 10, 1 to 15, and essentially do the same thing with many for a lower price point for them. And they get the amount of value and they actually learn and do in the process, which I think the outcome is better. So I want groups of people for my services next year. And in that, I'm getting speaking gigs. I'm doing workshops. And I think that the podcast is going to be something that's going to help those people who are interested learn on the way, because I'm only doing this twice a year. So at some point, they might have to wait 4 or 5 months. How am I going to have them hang in there and wait for that? And why would that be worth it? But it builds that credibility. Do you know how just having a podcast opens so many doors for you?
Trust me, I wouldn't be a podcaster if I wasn't.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Speaking opportunities, doing workshops, and it's amazing practice, but it builds a reputation like almost none other.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
Yeah. So you're saying that you want to start doing group stuff on top of maybe keep your 8 clients.
I can't do 8 a year if I'm doing the group, but it might be like 2 or 3 a year.
Okay. So 2 or 3 and then do the group.
Yep.
And just out of curiosity, because I think this is beneficial for a listener who's going through this, is it going to be worth it financially for you if you, let's just say you had 15 people in the group and 3 people one-on-one, how does that look with time and money versus having 8 one-on-ones and no group?
Okay.
Time
Let's
and
do
money.
a little like business kind of like strategy here. Whatever it is that you do for a business, even as a service-based business, there is ways to automate it a little bit or do it as a group as well. Financial services, investing, there are different ways to do this. And the one-on-one, this is what it feels like to do one-on-one. I love my one-on-one clients. I feel like what we're creating together is like, it's formation of a business. One of my clients even said, I feel like we gave birth. Like it seriously is like that. And I love my one-on-one clients and the relationship that I have with them. There's so many amazing people I want to work with and I can't because I'm already booked up. So that's one thing that sucks. But also my entire year feels like Groundhog Day. Sometimes I have 6 clients at once. Sometimes I have 2 or 3, but it is literally like, okay, internal brand strategy, positioning strategy, character. I'm invested in these people and I love what I do, but creatively it's exhausting. And I'm like, okay, how can I give myself this space? I'm also newly married. We're planning a family. Like I cannot hold this pace that I've had for my business. And it's created a ceiling. I have a limit of my income ceiling. I've essentially kind of maxed out what I think the value is of what it is that I've offered. Years after years, you just keep increasing it. So I wanted to do the group model. So instead of feeling like Groundhog Day, running the gauntlet, creatively tapped, what my business could look like for what it is that I'm designing. Again, it's this vision building, designing your business, how you want the podcast and everything to fit into that. I would be working my tushy off for 8 weeks, probably like March and April, and then another 8 weeks, like September, October. And probably 6 days a week. I mean, there's going to be a lot of one-on-one and personal feedback, and then doing the sessions, teaching people this and actually checking their work. It's going to be awesome. But in between those times, I can have a few one-on-one clients if I want to work with them. In the meantime, I can create podcasts. I can go to speeches. I can have a much more relaxed lifestyle. I'm thinking maybe 10 hours a week to maintain this, because honestly, I don't think I could take more than 15 to 20 people per cohort. There's a limit.
Yeah.
And because of the ability to do that 15 or 20 people, essentially, instead of someone paying 25 grand for my services as my mid-tier package, they can do it for 5. They learn more and they get an amazing outcome. They still get one-on-one help with me. But the coolest part is they're doing it with other people. Do you know how much you learn by actually like critiquing someone else's like brand or writing? It's so hard to do your own. It's hard for me even to do my own copywriting. But when you're able to help someone else, you get ideas, you get inspired. And that's the cool thing. When I listen to podcasts driving around the road, even if it's on a topic completely unrelated, I will get the most amazing business idea. It just kind of downloads when you're listening to other people. So I feel like it's going to have even more value. They're still going to get a website, going to have customizable templates that are based on the brand character and the brand archetype. And then when you update your photos, the colors, the fonts, you make it your own, and it's still authentic and unique and incomparable in your industry.
Yeah. All right. So the main question is, I want to move to a group model.
Mm-hmm.
And does that mean with my podcast, which may have lost a little bit of traction since I haven't posted
I'm sure
in 6 months or whatever, should I just completely rebrand and start from scratch? And it's hard to say because there's pros and cons. Question for you. The first 15, 16 episodes that you did do that have been published and it's been kind of stagnant for 5, 6 months, were those perfect for this avatar as well?
Yes.
So then there's pros and cons.
Mm-hmm.
Pros, they're already recorded. They're already helpful. They're already there. It's already been established. You can just get to consistent. Cons, when launching a podcast, you can get some cool traction in the first 8 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
If you are adding gas to the tank, fuel to the fire, if you're putting marketing behind it, if you're calling friends saying, listen to my podcast, give me an honest rating and review. If you are posting on social and saying, guess what? I'm launching a podcast. I'm excited. It's going to be about this. There's some traction that you can build. And there's this guy named Jeff Walker. I don't remember the exact name of his podcast, of his book, but I think it might be called The Pre-Launch Formula. I'll make sure that we link to it in the show notes. We probably have an affiliate link for like Amazon and Audible. So we'll link to the Audible version of Jeff Walker's book and the actual version of it as well, so that the listener can get it. he talks a lot about launching and this idea of a pre-launch. And the takeaways that I can try to share, it's like when we're about to do something, we need to do our best to get the most amount of people behind it.
Yeah.
That's part of it. And additionally, when we get somebody behind it, we don't get them behind your podcast. We get them behind like what your podcast does. So think of it as whatever you are doing, think of it as a movement. You talked about R.E.D, R-E-D. The D was, I think, how you distinguish yourself.
Yep. Distinguish, differentiation.
Differentiate. So this line in the sand, it's a way of saying everything else is this way, but I'm a badass. I do it different. We talk on the podcast a lot about that guy whose name is You got to say it like that because he's a cave person. We talk about because he didn't just have the same message as the already chief. He didn't just say, yeah, I agree with everything the chief says. Do you want to follow me? He said he distinguished himself. It differentiated himself. He said, the chief doesn't like fire. I think fire's got all of these benefits. He drew a line in the sand and he said, if you want fire and you can scare away the animals, predators, the saber-toothed tigers from eating your children, you can cook your food and not have the runs anymore, and all of the other things. I could stay warm. I can stay here. And so he draws this line in the sand. He basically almost had a poo-poo on, or at least differentiate what's on that side versus what he does a little bit differently. And Jeff Walker talks about doing that in the beginning. Yes. And as you're doing a pre-launch and getting people excited, I mean, we do it anyway. I do it almost all the time that I'm recording. I talk about how my company does things differently. And that's all beneficial. So you could get some benefit by going Jeff Walker's way, pre-launch way, getting people excited, building a movement, having a way to differentiate yourself, or you could keep what you have. In my mind, I don't think that you need to change the name of the podcast.
I love it. I hope I wouldn't have to.
I don't think that you need to change the content of the podcast. I don't think you need to change the avatar either of your podcast. I think everything's being served. And so you've either got to take more time and money and hope that you do it right the second time. And if you do, let me help you. We're good at what we do. Or just go ahead and keep with what you're doing. If it were me and I was in the same position, I honestly believe, and you said you know what I'm going to say, so I'm wondering if this is what you think.
I want to hear it too. Yeah, is this?
I would say keep the ones up that you have, add some fuel to the fire, and promote paid and organic, like by social media, by those same phone calls, and then just get back to consistent at least once a week. And you can possibly get more benefit by cutting it and redoing it. But I think it's going to be hard for you to like connect it to Apple again with the same name. You probably have to change the name a little bit.
That's what I was going to ask. Is there a penalty? Like if what I've already done. Maybe not a whole
penalty, but a possible drawback is relaunching it under the same name. From my experience, and I don't have the answer literally in front of me, but we've helped a few people relaunch. And every time we've done it, that we've switched the name a little bit. So, or we've switched it completely. But for you, Brand Anatomy, is that the full name that's on the podcast? Brand Anatomy. And then it says Monica Fawn. Okay.
Yep. So
it would have to be, if you rebranded this, it would have to be Brand Anatomy for Entrepreneurs would be the new name. Or Brand Anatomy, what's your archetype? Or Brand Anatomy, how understanding this can 10x your income. So you would basically keep the title, but make the subtitle as well part of the new title. And then just add that somewhere on the artwork to be able to draw those people in, but also be able to relaunch. If I were you in the same position, honestly, I think I would just publish episodes 16, 17, 18, 19, and I would do everything that I can for paid marketing and organic marketing, phone calls, social media, etc. And I want to go back to something. I want to ask you, So that's my advice. Is that what you thought I would say?
No.
Okay.
So I'm surprised. I'm so glad I asked as well. I thought you would have said it would be safe to relaunch. You just talk about all the amazing benefits of launching. I am, as a brand strategist and a brand developer and designer, I'm all for like, okay, let's start from scratch. I have so many better ideas for it. Make it better, make it better. But like I said, you get stuck in that starter phase, that build phase. And like a hairdresser, I can make so many different things. I can go so many different ways. And it's really hard to actually decide what you're going to wear that day, what you're going to stick with. So, but no, I know my audience, the content on there is amazing. I love the idea of like your pre-course thing. So maybe relaunching with like, here's a series, here's a course. And I think that that might help reintegrate it again, I guess. But even though as a brand strategist, I need your help, Adam.
Yeah. Well, I think that you will get almost as much value by just growing what you have, letting your email list know, that one guy, however many people are on your email list, let them know that you're redoing this, that you're adding to it. There could be benefits, but I feel like the pros and cons with where you are, I feel like it'll be beneficial for you to just keep adding and then do whatever you can to market.
Okay.
You could go either way. Honestly, both ways would be fine. That's just what I think that I would do in your same situation. Just add to it and tell people about it.
Okay. So here's another curveball, actually. I want to monetize and have sponsors. Does that change your answer?
Not so much. I think there are some benefits to getting a sponsor by showing them that you started it in 2021 or whatever the year was, whenever you started it, 2022. And just by saying, like, let's say we're in 2023 now. And when the listeners hears this, who knows when, it might be 2027. But let's say we're in 2023 and you started in 2022, just for an example. Just that, you can just say, oh yeah, we launched last year and it's got this history, this amount of listeners, this amount of downloads. If you rebrand, you lose those downloads, which might be fine. Maybe it's not a lot. It might be okay. But if you focus on the marketing, I share this a lot on the podcast, but I think it's important to mention it now. I need to go from A to B. I'm in a car and I know where I want to go. I know the route that I want to go. I know where I want to stop. I know how frequently I want to stop. I know what I want to achieve. I know who I'm going to bring with me. I know what I'm going to do when I get there. All of that's great. This is your branding. But if you just don't put gas in the tank, you're not going there. You're not able to go there. Unless you're super duper strong and you can get behind the car and push it the whole way, you have to have fuel. Somehow you have to have fuel, organic or paid. So you got to either push that car and eat your food so that you can push it that far, or you got to drop at the gas station or the Tesla charging station and fill up the energy, the power, the fuel that's going to get you from point A to point B. It doesn't really matter if you know all of what you want to achieve, who you're bringing, where you're going to stop, what you're going to do when you get there. If you don't get there, if you just stay where you are, then you're not going to do anything. So it's just so important that regardless if you refresh it or like rebrand it and pull things, that you find a way to add the most amount of fuel when you're getting there. So it's like you've already made it. You've got this plan. I'm going from, let's just say, Denver to Salt Lake, and you've made it to Vail. You got up the hill and you just ran out of gas. The gas isn't happening right now. All you really got to do is fill up your tank a couple more times to get to Salt Lake. So you're going to, at this point, you're already in Vail. You're already at episode 15. You've made it this far. I think that it's totally fine and easy for you to get from Vail to Salt Lake, then to come back to Denver and then start it all over. I think you just got to add the fuel. And all that means is tell your friends, email it to the people, call your friends, put it on social, Facebook, LinkedIn, etc. Like I said before, send it to your email list. And if at all possible, if you have the finances to do it, do some paid marketing. Pay a company like ours to market it and grow it and get it in front of the right people. Do your own Facebook ads if you're comfortable with it, if you have experience with it. Any type of paid advertising that you can. It's like, it sucks that I'm in Vail and I can't get to Salt Lake without filling up my tank a couple more times. But that investment of filling up the tank, and maybe we're recording this around the time that that's not cheap, that investment of filling up the tank is something that will pay dividends. You want to go to Salt Lake, you have all these plans, you know what you're going to do when you get there. You just got to like make that investment ahead of time, which is scary. You got to take out some money, fill up the tank, and you know that you're not going to get all the way to Salt Lake from that one little thing.
That's like so many of my clients.
Perfect.
So many of my clients as well. They've DIY'd it through their branding, through their website. Then they're coming to me and they're like, gosh, this is just so much easier. I get so much more traction. I'm doing the same thing as I did with my podcast. I'm going to DIY it till I get so far. But I think the podcaster and I have a question about the credibility of that. Now, I'm not talking about like, oh, I'm just going to go down to Joe on the corner who has a business and will you sponsor my podcast? I want to go towards like Host Hub, Wix, for them to be a sponsor of this. Now, with that into account, I'll go back to Denver and hike up to Vail again, I guess. But I guess I'm worried more about the credibility. And the podcast is not a waste. Those episodes are not a waste. I honestly, after listening to your podcast, I want to redo my intro a little bit. There's definitely room for improvement. But I feel like the content in the middle could just be like, repackaged. For people who have already listened, now and then they're going to hear an episode they've already heard before. And I actually did that on my third podcast. There were a couple episodes. In the second one, I repurposed and I had a short little intro. And then I said, oh, from the vault, blah, blah, blah. I had the cool vault sound. And then they had this other really valuable podcast episode. There were 3 or 4 I could reuse with that credibility piece in mind. And I mean, like high-end sponsors, huge national, international companies. Now the credibility of starting back in Denver, is that helpful?
It probably is.
Okay.
It probably is. So I think what she's asking is like, I've got 2 ways to go. I want an amazing sponsor, somebody that I reach out to and that's going to believe in what I'm doing. Is there any difference to, I put out 15 episodes a year ago and I'm starting again versus I'm launching, it's going to be amazing.
And I have Adam and this huge company who's going to market it for me.
In my opinion, if that's the case and you're monetizing, I would actually probably say just to relaunch it. Okay. Because I don't want that sponsor, Hub something. What was it? HubSpot. Yeah. I guess we have to link to HubSpot now in the show notes. So if you're my editor, link to HubSpot. I don't know what HubSpot is.
HubSpot is an email service provider. So a lot of my real estate investors, they have HubSpot or ActiveCampaign for the other one. We always used ActiveCampaign. Okay, so HubSpot's like ActiveCampaign. So these are what my clients are using. I mean, I'm helping them build out automations for their branding, all these things. I'm working intimately with these programs. I build all my client sites on Wix. I've done a few other website platforms, but for these group, it's going to be Wix. So the actual products I'm promoting and recommending to my clients, I want to reach out to them. Yep.
That makes total sense. And so again, going back to this, should I say, hey, I kind of started and then I stopped and I'm starting again. Do you want to be part of it? Or, hey, let's make this happen. My opinion is it could be a challenge to get those sponsors. The only reason I say that, I had a client and his name's Stu. Great guy, had a phenomenal podcast, super driven, and just somebody that I loved working with. He's got a vision of where he wants to go. And for him, he was thinking about his sponsors like HubSpot and Wix. They were different companies, but Stu was thinking about these companies. And the problem is he never got a hold of them.
Yes, that was my concern.
He started to get a hold of one and then the LinkedIn message they kind of ghosted him and he reached out and then a gatekeeper just kind of blocked it. So for him, it was a real challenge. And I'm used to have like a perfect track record, like all of our clients. It was a thing like, and even our mutual friend, Julie, Julie called one person one time and started making $2,500 a month.
Yes.
And she didn't even have a giant podcast when she landed that sponsor. But I think she kind of had an in with that sponsor first.
Yeah.
She didn't just say, oh, Wix, HubSpot. I think one of the companies that Stu wanted was this company called Onnit, Onnit. And they've got this like alpha brain, blah, 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 that basically a nootropic that helps you think straight. And he uses it and he likes it and he believes in it and he enjoys it. And he tried to get a hold of them, but like never got past the gatekeeper. And so we just got to pause and say, I think it makes sense to go after those people. It doesn't mean that you're definitely going to land them, because I had at least a dozen clients. We've had 70 plus clients, but at least a dozen of them that told me, I want a sponsor. And I said, let's go on a coaching call and I'll help you find a sponsor. I'll help you figure out who you're going to reach out to, how you're going to reach out to them. One of the pieces in those conversations that we generally have is, who do you know? What owner do you know? What salesperson do you know? What marketing part of this team do you know personally? And do you use them and believe in them?
And I have a few people that are like this on my list as well. Not like as a backup, but I did know not just to go for like the biggest whales, because I have no idea where to start and even reaching out to them. I might have an in with the Wix, but everything else, no.
Okay. Well, just thinking through it, there's some benefit that you could probably have by just relaunching if monetizing with a bigger sponsor. And also it can be hard. I got a sponsor for my first podcast. It was a friend.
Yeah.
It was a company that I used and I became friends with one of the main people. And so he was able to reach out to the owner and say, let's support him. He supports us, blah, 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 blah. It wasn't a ton of money. We got $300 and I put them on 3 episodes. It was like $100 an episode. It's not bad compared to CPM model, where a lot of people are like making $5 an episode. And I was able to make a 300 or 100 per. For you, you could probably reach out to those people that you know and have an in with. And it most likely, in my opinion, won't be a big deal that you're relaunching, because they know you and understand you. They already like you and trust you. And you could just let them know, hey, I'm not going to stop for this many episodes. This is how many episodes I'm going to publish. This is what I want to achieve. When selling to a sponsor, always say what's in it for you.
Of course.
Yeah. So why are they going to get a benefit? But if you're going after these bigger sponsors, I don't know for a fact that you can get past the gatekeeper all the time. So it might not matter so much if you are doing it from scratch. But if you can get past the gatekeeper and they are going to consider you, I think there's a little bit of a benefit to them trying to get behind your movement when you draw your line in the sand and say, join me, than the loss of credibility that I think can happen with somebody who doesn't know you, like you, or trust you yet, for them to know and understand that who's to say you're going to keep going with this podcast? You did 15, you stopped for 6 months.
Yes.
How do I know if you're going to do it? Anyway, I believe that you should probably rebrand based on that. And I also just don't want to sugarcoat anything and make you think that for a fact you're going to get a top sponsor. Because like Stu, we worked together for like 4 months and he spent 3 of those months trying to get past gatekeepers for Onnit and a couple of other big companies, and it didn't work for him. So just know that there's some challenge of making it through, and the best result is to find an in. Some of the strategies would be LinkedIn, Facebook, email. So we go to LinkedIn and we find their email. We can get their like company email, or if it shows like their personal email, sometimes we just try first initial, last name, or first name at website.com, at companywebsite.com. And every now and again, it'll work. So that way you might be able to get in front of them. And I would use the 10X rule. I'm not a huge fan of Grant. Stay close to your mic, by the way. I'm not a huge fan of Grant Cardone, but he is brilliant and successful, and he is a billionaire. and he does have good people working around him. And so it's nice to follow some of the things that he does. One of those things is I was told to read 10X Rule, and I was like, no, I'm not going to do it. He's an arrogant person. I don't care to get any content from him. And I was told by so many people that I said, just read it. I've read all my other books. I'll just download it. It was cheap. And I listened to it. And I was like, man, this guy's onto something. And all it meant, the big takeaway was, it's like blitz. If you playing football and you want to sack the quarterback, you're on defense, you don't just say to one of your guys, hey, go and try to get him, and have everybody else chill. That's not an effective way. It could work. It might not work. It probably won't, but it could. Grant is basically like, I want everyone on the team because there's no rules in business. So he's like, I don't care if I can only have 10 on the field. Typically, I'm going to go and get the rest of the team, and I'm going to get the fans, and I'm going to cover the eyes of the person. He's like, I'm going to try everything and anything all at once, blitz it. And that seems to be one of the things that's effective for him. So for you, how this relates to getting your sponsor, I would definitely reach out to them on Facebook and LinkedIn and email, and reach out to another person. Look up the company, look up on LinkedIn. You're able to filter out. You look for a company, even small companies. My real estate investing company is on LinkedIn, and you can see the 5 employees that were part of it. And then you can email all 5 of them. And so I would do that. I would go in and I would say to somebody, doesn't even matter what their position is. I would say, hey, that's awesome that you work for this company. Who do I talk to about sponsorship so that it's in their best interest?
Yes.
Who can I talk about sponsorship and partnering with my show so that I can promote you on my podcast in front of all of my listeners that care about your stuff? And you would reach out to, 30 people if you can, that are all part of that company. And then they all recommend this other person. Maybe they all recommend the same person or 2 people. And then you reach out to them. Hey, John and Sarah and Amy and Carl from your company said that I need to talk to you about sponsorship. And now you're name dropping. And John and Sarah and Carl and Sarah and whoever else from your company said I need to talk to you about potentially having you as a partner with my show so that I can promote you. How do you and I have that conversation? And then you ask them to describe what it looks like. And that can be hopefully get past some gatekeepers. Hopefully that's a helpful tip.
And that's the strategy that you recommended for also getting guests as a podcast as well.
Yep.
If you want somebody high end, high level, can't really reach them, that's the way in that way too.
Yep. And it does seem to help. You got some notes.
Oh.
What is there anything on those notes that you want to address while we're on the call?
Oh, well, everything around branding pertains to podcasting. Podcasting is one of the most amazing ways to apply your brand. But I think one of the things that I always like to address on podcast calls is branding is confusing. People have the concept of what branding is, but not truly understanding. They think logos, websites come to mind, fonts, colors, like, oh, branding. How is that supposed to help me build my reputation, experience distinction? And that's why my podcast is called Brand Anatomy. It's actually 5 parts of branding. And most people are missing 4 or 3.5 of them.
You could miss 3.5?
Oh, hell yeah.
How do you miss 3.5?
So it's kind of like you have this Grand Canyon. You're starting a business, you do your business plan, then you go to market. So you're jumping from one side of the canyon to the other, but there's a huge gap in the middle. And it is, what is it are you marketing? Well, if you're just marketing your services, oh, I have amazing investments. You invest with me, you make money back. It's real estate. It's called multifamily syndication. And then you're missing the meat. You're trying to jump the Grand Canyon. So your marketing takes more time and energy, and it fails, and people don't get tractions even years later. So then they're figuring out, oh, I need to figure out my avatar. I need to write these one-liners. How do I do that? And it's the first 3 pieces of branding. Earlier, I mentioned we build our brands the way we experience them. There are so many different pieces of brand messaging and copywriting, and people will kind of get some of them. So let's think when we start a business, we're like, oh, I'm going to come up with a great name for it. The name is actually in phase 3. So before coming up with the name for your business, now I don't think you did this, Adam, but some people tend to do this. I'll pick my favorite football team, the road that my father grew up on, just something, especially in real estate syndication. There's so many different, what do you name it? And
There's
I
a lot
help
of people
with that.
Just initial themselves.
Yes.
I'm going to try not to use an actual initial that I've heard, but there's a lot that are like, I'm going to be BKL investing. And yeah, I always think like, what does BKL mean? Why does it matter to your investor?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So when people come to work with you, Adam, you walk them through these parts of branding and they haven't done it or they haven't done it to the full extent. That's the exact example of halfway done, half baked. So we build a brand backwards because that's how we experience it. First, we see all the pretty stuff, the logo, we read the cool stuff. And then, oh, now I kind of understand like what they believe in and I'll see these different pieces. But okay, the way that I walk my clients through building a brand anatomy is we do the internal strategy first. You've talked about vision here. We're talking mission, purpose, values, like all of those. You're asking your podcasters before you work with them, hey, what is your mission? What is this for the podcast? Because you're doing the brand anatomy the correct way, not what do you want to call it? All right, cool. What do you want the cover? All right, let's wing it is how we usually do it. So then we go into the next phase, which is the positioning strategy. Again, we've already talked about this. How is this different from the marketplace? In the middle is that character development. This is how we personify our brand so that it builds a reputation. I can recognize them. I can personally connect to you, Adam. But a brand itself can have its own identity as well. So we're going to build a character and personify and humanize that with an archetype. Is this kind of like an outlaw? All brands that we know, like and trust and love do this. Apple, Nike, they all have a different type. Harley Davidson. Here's an example. Let's use motorcycles. I know the difference between Harley, Ducati, and KTM. I see 3 different people when I hear those motorcycle brand names. Same with cars like Jeep, Mercedes, and Honda. There's a mom in there. There's a young dude who's breaking his arm or crushing it in there, like Adam. And what was the other? Mercedes. There's maybe a CEO in a business. These are identities, human characteristics, and personas. And when we try to create messaging and create visuals and create content without these 3 pieces, we're just flying by the seat of our pants, nothing sticking to the wall. And that's where we can also get really confused on how do I authentically show up as well within this. So those are kind of the 3.5 pieces that are missing. Then we go into the character expression we just talked about, then the verbal expression, and then the visual expression. In there is the website, the social media, the logo, all of that. But to finish what we were talking about with the brand name, they've already created the name. Now we're trying to go backwards and make it connect to the audience, make it memorable. Sometimes I can do that and we can get creative. Sometimes a client didn't even hire me to do a business name change. And halfway through writing their copy, I'm like, so you're talking about this funnel over here and this other funnel and how you bring them together. I'm like, so it's like an hourglass? Oh, okay. Let's change the business name to Hourglass Partner. It's no longer Chem Docs because he was a chemistry doctor. And with his accent, I could never understand what he was saying. And it was very hard to spell. But like, so these are the things that develop.
Okay. So why are we bringing that up?
Why are we bringing that up? So essentially, that's what's one of the things that's most needed when you're podcasting. But I brought that up because we're talking about what the heck is branding. Yeah. So branding is kind of like an M&M. We see the outer M&M. Shell. I love M&Ms.
One of my favorite. Oh, you like the candy.
The candy, I like the wrapper. No, the wrapper. We could have a whole nother thing about branding and Mr. M&M here. So no, the actual candy. So branding is like an M&M. We see this hard shell on the outside, but we don't eat it.
It doesn't melt in your hand. I know that.
No, yeah, that's what it does. It makes it colorful because color induces appetite. We're hungry right now. We're going to start talking about food. Color induces appetite and it keeps it from melting in your hand. It has a purpose. So it looks pretty and it's fun. But what's in the middle, that's what we actually want, is the chocolate. So think of your brand in that way. So I was at a garage sale with my parents and the neighbor came over. I hadn't seen her in years. Oh, what are you doing now? Oh, like I'm a brand consultant, I told her. And she goes, oh, like in cattle? Sorry, we're in Colorado. So I'm like, no, I'm not branding cattle. I'm like, what am I telling the cowboy how hot the iron needs to be? Like, what would be a cattle brand? So that threw me off. I normally have my game. This is what I do. Yeah, threw me off completely. I was like, no, I struggled. I started grasping at straws. I'm like logos and websites. It's not really what branding is, but I knew that's what she was going to understand. She thought I was branding cattle. So I'm like, okay, let's take it very basic level. But the brand is essentially the identity. A brand is just a perception. That's what we're creating. It's not the logo. It's not necessarily the words. We're building a perception. A perception is made up of the reputation, the experience, and the distinction. But it was Elon Musk who said a brand is just perception, and perception will match reality over time. So what is it that you want to build? Where do you want to go? A lot of my clients are saying, I'm not there yet. I'm only GP on a couple of properties, or I'm only LP and I'm trying to be GP, but I'm like, okay, we want to be authentic and build trust, but we need to build something for you to grow into. If we don't position you and build up this perception as you're knowledgeable, you're an authority, you won't actually get there, or at least it's going to take a hell of a lot longer to do that. And so essentially that's part of the point that's important with the podcast too, is what is it, the perception that you're building? But at the very bottom, there's so many elements that build brand trust. At the very bottom, the deepest level of brand trust is emotional connection. And I think authenticity is the key to all of that. So that's why Onthentic Branding is my business name.
I love it. I love it. A lot of that's so important. There's people that want to start a podcast and they won't yet because those pieces aren't there. And so that's good. Let's get those pieces there. There's people that want to start a podcast and they won't because they don't think they're as good as somebody else who has a podcast. But I don't think it matters if they're as good. I think it matters who they are. Yes. And it just as an illustration, going back to, we keep talking about limited partners and general partners and syndicating apartments. I remember back in the day when I had a podcast that was being seen, I had a business that was about the same as all these other businesses. Honestly, I didn't really draw the line in the sand incredibly well, except some of our experience. But one of the things that got me the most amount of investors was a couple of the things, and it all goes to authenticity. Mm-hmm. One of them is not trying to be those other people, but to just be me. Because if I'm trying to be as animated as this other person or as intellectual as this other person, but it's not like me completely unauthentically, then people are going to sense it. They're going to know. They're going to feel that something's off. And so by trying to imitate completely like somebody else, their personality, their energy, you need to have your own personality, your energy. Same thing with your experience. Just be authentic about your experience. Your right people will follow you. I love that. And for me, another one was about being vulnerable. And for me as and I'm going to also talk about my mountain bike being the last thing, but the second one is just being vulnerable. So when I made a mistake, I shared it on social. I shared it on my podcast. And it was so weird because I got more investors when I said I made a mistake. I'm thinking, if I share this, I'm going to lose the trust of a lot of people, but it's still important. It's still a good lesson. And I feel like I should share it. But I share it. And then people are like, now I want to invest with you. Now that I know that you're messing up, I want to invest with you. And it just was so confusing. And I think that part of it is a lot of the other people that were doing what I was doing pretended like everything was always perfect.
Yes.
And you can't really trust that. And then when I would share when something goes wrong, now they can trust that. So the second one was just being completely vulnerable about my shortcomings. When I made a mistake, what I haven't done. And people are like, well, hey, at least I know exactly where he stands. And then the third one, and it goes back to just owning your brand and being yourself, is I remember a few times that I would actually get an investor. Like I said before, we weren't that different from other companies. We did the same stuff. We gave you a return. Yes. You know what I mean? And I switched my social from all about real estate stuff to just talking about me mountain biking. I love mountain biking. I got real into it in 2020 during the pandemic. Couldn't go to CrossFit anymore, so I switched to mountain biking. It was the only way I could exercise. And what ended up happening in 2020 is I kept getting people calling me and saying, you know what, Adam, I could invest with anyone. You all do the same stuff, but you are into the same thing that I'm into. And so a few mountain bikers just stopped going with all of the other options, and they just went with me because I just shared exactly who I was, how I was. And there is a unique thing that we had in common, and they just went ahead and resonated with it. So, yeah.
Those are elements. Again, we talked about that deepest level of brand trust. I have a brand trust pyramid. You can go to my website and download it and see all the 5 pieces. We just talked about the middle piece there, and that's understanding and validation. And that helped launch them into having an emotional connection with you and going into the deepest layer of brand trust. I have 2 quick analogies to kind of go with that. Well, one's sort of a story example, but you said better. And everybody's like, oh, I need to be the best. I need to be better than so-and-so, all these different things. Better to who? It's an opinion. And when we're thinking we need to be a certain way, we're just like splashing a lot on what our investor thinks. Like what we think our investor wants to hear and see might not be what they're actually looking for. So better, like, oh, these shoes are better. To who? These hiking boots are better when I'm going for a hike, but they're not better for my wedding. So like there's different shoes, there's different molds that we need to fulfill, and who they're looking for. They might be looking for someone to follow. I want to be like them. Or they might be looking for someone who has knowledge, who can guide them.
Yeah.
And so one person is better for another person.
It's like your 3 cars.
Yes.
The Jeep is better
exactly
if you want to go off-roading.
Yes.
The Honda is better if you want good gas mileage and it to last a long, long time. And the Mercedes is better if you want to show the world how much you're spending on a car, or if you just really care about the luxury of the, I don't know, it's like 136 colors that the Mercedes can change the interior.
Wow. Okay.
You just like push a button and it's fuchsia. You push a different button and it's red or blue or aqua. You got like 130 something colors that most of these Mercedes can do. So you want all the luxury and you want your butt to be cooled or heated. Great. You get that with some of these brands.
Then the Mercedes is better for you. So another thing that you said, and actually I use Grant Cardone as an example for this. So it's so funny you already mentioned him in here. So when we're talking about how we show up in our business, creating that perception, how we do it authentically, one of the things that trips my clients up a lot is like, oh, I'm this person. I'm a mountain biker. I'm a dad. Like that's it. So I need to show up as that. But we're actually very multifaceted human beings. Like I can be the mountain girl, but I can also be the girl that gets dressed up and does the girly stuff. Like we have so many different identities, and usually we're putting ourselves in a box. So this is where sometimes like some of my best clients are ones that have like coaching, have gone through coaching, maybe therapy at some level, but like it really helps in branding. But they understand, yeah, I'm a multifaceted human being. I can choose how I show up in different situations. We already do that naturally. It's appropriate to be this way at Moms. I can be this way with my friends. I'm the same person. So I like to use Mr. Potato Head. When you're creating your brand, you want to show up pretty consistently. You can have a couple different glasses, you can have different hat, and you wear the mustache. And those things have come from inside your bucket. Now, if I want to go and take Grant Cardone's hat and start wearing it, people are going to know it's inauthentic immediately. So whatever it is that you're presenting in your content, in your podcast, through your brand, if it comes from your bucket, keep it consistent. You can choose it intentionally. Like I know that my investor is looking for, we're going to talk a little bit about archetypes here, like the magician creator. I'm already this researcher. I'm already these types of things. Now I'm just going to show that side of myself more than maybe the lover archetype that I am with other certain people, or the adventurer that I am like in my off time. Can talk about these elements, but this is who I am. But I'm choosing this is who they need in this arena, in this need for their business. We'll take those things from my own bucket, not taking them from anyone else's, and put them on. And then this is easily me authentically, but it connects and it's who they're looking for. That makes sense.
Drop your mic.
I've actually done too much with my mic. I don't want to drop it because I've given your team a hard enough time with editing, I'm sure.
Monica, thank you for jumping on. It is at point where it's time to jump off this episode. I will say your podcast, the link is already in the show notes. And if you do rebrand, we're going to get the new link in the show notes. So I'll just make sure that my listener can find you pretty easy, and your company as well. So that's already in the show notes. Your bio's in the show notes. Love talking about all this multifaceted, the branding, everything that we can do with a podcast. And if you're listening, and you are, I'll see you on the next episode. If you're glad that you checked out the podcast today, if you got some value out of this episode, some actionable takeaways, I invite you to do one of three things. A, you could do a written review on Apple. Let us know what you think. Just an honest written review. B, you could share the podcast with a friend of yours who needs it. Or C, at the very least, implement what you've learned to take your business and your podcast to the next level. And I'll see you on the next episode.